Marry me, and every debt your family owes will be gone by morning." The man who said those words was wearing a dusty coat held together by one button and boots with holes in the soles. Half the town laughed at him behind their hands. The other half pitied him. Lydia Hale looked at Ethan Crow standing in her doorway. This nobody, this vagrant, this man who owned nothing but a reputation for silence and felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief, not gratitude, pure bone-cold terror. Because she was going to say yes, and she already knew it. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling you in, please take a moment right now and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get back to Lydia Hale, because her story is just getting started. The debt collectors had come 3 times that week. The first time Lydia had stood at the window and watched them ride up 2 men in town clothes with ledger books tucked under their arms, and she had told herself it was just paperwork, that her father would handle it, that things would sort themselves the way they always had, slowly, painfully, but eventually. The second time they had walked inside without being invited. The third time they had left a notice nailed to the front door. Lydia pulled the notice down herself so her mother wouldn't see it first. She read it on the porch alone, while the wind came off the hills and the paper shook in her hands. The language was formal and cold, the kind of language that had been written by men who never once thought about the people on the other side of the words. 30 days, all assets, the land, the livestock, the farmhouse itself. 30 days. She stood there for a long time after she finished reading. Inside, her father coughed. It was a sound she had grown terrifyingly familiar with over the past 6 months. Wet and deep and wrong in a way that no amount of willow bark tea or rest seemed to touch. The doctor in town had used words she hadn't fully understood the first time, and understood far too well the second time. Her father was not going to recover. That wasn't cruelty speaking. That was just the truth, standing in the room with all of them patient as stone. Her mother knew it too. She just couldn't say it yet. Lydia walked back inside and set the notice face down on the kitchen table. "Was that them again?" her mother asked without turning from the stove. "Just the wind," Lydia said. Her mother didn't answer. She stirred whatever was in the pot slowly, like a woman carrying something too heavy to put down. That night, Lydia sat at the table long after her parents had gone to bed, and she counted every dollar they had left. She did it twice, then a third time, changing nothing, but hoping the numbers would somehow rearrange themselves into something survivable. They didn't. The number at the end was the same each time. It wasn't enough to cover 1/10 of what they owed. It wasn't enough to buy medicine for another month. It wasn't enough to matter. She put her head down on her arms and didn't cry because crying felt like spending something she couldn't afford. She thought instead. She thought about who owed her father favors and came up with a list that shrank the longer she looked at it. Most of those men had their own problems now. The drought 2 summers back had taken the softness out of everyone in this county. Generosity required margin, and nobody had any. She thought about the bank, but she had already spoken to the bank. The man behind the desk had been polite in the particular way that men were polite when they had already decided not to help you and just needed to finish the conversation. She thought about selling something and realized there was nothing left that hadn't already been calculated. She was still sitting there when she heard her father call her name. She went upstairs. He was propped up against the headboard, thinner than he had been even last week, his face carrying that gray-yellow color that frightened her, in a way she had never admitted out loud. But his eyes were sharp. They had always been sharp. That was one of the last things illness took from a man like her father, his eyes. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "I know about the notice." She should have been surprised. She wasn't. "Papa, I've known for a while," he said. His voice was quieter than it used to be, but it still had weight to it. "I kept hoping something would change. I kept thinking I'd find a way out of it." He paused. "I was wrong." Lydia didn't say anything. "There's a man," he said. He came to see me 2 weeks ago. Asked about you." She went still. "What man?" "Ethan Crow." The name sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. She knew the name. Everyone in the county knew the name. Ethan Crow was, depending on who you asked, either the sorriest excuse for a rancher within 50 miles or the strangest man any of them had ever encountered. He lived alone in a shack on the edge of the Crow family land, which amounted to a strip of rocky hillside that produced almost nothing. He showed up in town maybe once a month, bought minimal supplies, spoke to almost no one, and left without fanfare. He wasn't unpleasant exactly. He was just absent in a way that made people uncomfortable, as though the usual social expectations simply passed through him without finding anywhere to land. People talked about him the way they talked about weather. Uncertain, faintly contemptuous, vaguely aware that they didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. "What does Ethan Crow want?" Lydia asked carefully. Her father looked at her with an expression she didn't have a name for. "He wants to marry you." The words landed like a physical thing. Lydia stood up from the chair. "Sit down," her father said. "I'm not going to." "Lydia, sit down." Something in his voice stopped her. Not authority exactly. He was too sick for that kind of weight anymore. It was something else. Something closer to exhaustion. Like a man who has looked at every door and found them all locked and is now asking one last time. She sat. "He said he'd cleared the debt," her father said. "All of it. He'd pay what we owe on the land, the back taxes, the medical costs. He said he'd make sure your mother has what she needs." He coughed once, controlled it with visible effort. "He came to me first. He said he wanted to do it properly." Lydia heard the words. She processed them with the part of her brain that was still functioning like a rational person. And then another part of her, the part that had been listening to debt collectors knock on the door, that had been counting the same insufficient dollars at the kitchen table, that had been watching her mother stir soup with the face of a woman who had already accepted the worst. That part began to understand the shape of what was happening. "You want me to marry him," she said. "A man who lives in a shack. A man with nothing. You want me to—" "I want you to be safe," her father said, and his voice broke on the last word just slightly, in a way that broke something in Lydia too. She didn't say anything for a long moment. "What do you know about him?" she finally asked. "Not enough," he admitted. "I know he's never been in trouble with the law. I know he keeps his word. There are 2 men in town who'll say so without prompting. I know he's quiet, which is better than half the loud men I could name." He looked at her steadily. "I know he looked me in the eye when he talked, and he didn't look away when it got uncomfortable. That's very little to build a life on." "I know." Lydia sat with that for a long time. The house was quiet around them. The particular quiet of a place that had once been full of ordinary noised children and cooking smells, and her father's voice carrying in from outside, and was now just holding its breath. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "He's coming tomorrow morning," her father said. Her head turned sharply. "You already told him to come. I told him you'd give him an answer." He held her gaze. "I'm sorry, Lydia. I'm sorry it came to this." She left without saying anything else. Not because she was angry, she was past anger somewhere on the other side of it. She went downstairs, walked back to the kitchen table, and sat in the same chair where she'd spent the last hour counting money that wasn't there. And she stared at the face-down notice, and she thought about what choice really meant when every path led somewhere painful. He arrived at 8 in the morning, which was earlier than she had expected. Lydia heard the horse before she saw him, a single set of hoofbeats, not rushed, not tentative, just steady. She was at the window when he rode up, and she studied him the way she hadn't allowed herself to study him in the handful of times she'd seen him in town. He was tall. Leaner than she remembered, but not gaunt, the kind of lean that came from work rather than want. His coat was as always visibly worn, his hat was dusty, his horse on the other hand was excellent. She noticed that immediately and filed it away somewhere. He knocked. She answered the door herself. They looked at each other. "Miss Hale," he said. "Mr. Crow, I appreciate you agreeing to speak with me." "I haven't agreed to anything," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like a recognition, as though he'd expected exactly that response and found it reasonable. "May I come in?" She stood aside. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd counted insufficient money the night before, and her mother brought coffee without being asked, and then disappeared upstairs with a tact that Lydia was not in the mood to appreciate. Ethan Crow sat across from her with his hat on the table and his hands around the coffee cup, and he looked at her with gray eyes that were, she realized, considerably more direct than most men bothered to be. "I'll say what I came to say plainly," he began. "Please," she said. "I know your situation. I'm not here to make you feel small about it. I'm here because I want to make you an offer, and I want to give you the full truth of it, so you can make a real decision. My father told me about the offer. The money, yes, that part stands. I'll clear every debt attached to this property and your family's name before the month is out. Your mother will have enough to maintain this house for the next several years at minimum." He paused. "But that's not the whole offer." Lydia waited. "The whole offer is a real marriage," he said. "Not an arrangement that gets dissolved once the paperwork is settled. A real one. I'm asking you to come with me to my land and to build something. Not because I expect you to be grateful, and not because I think you owe me anything, but because I'm a man who's lived alone for too long, and I'd like that to change." He picked up the coffee cup, set it down, without drinking. "I know what I look like to this town. I know what people say. I'm not asking you to ignore that. I'm asking you to give me time to show you something different." Lydia studied his face. There was nothing performative about him. No charm working overtime, no rehearsed softness designed to reassure her. He was just present. Still and present in a way she couldn't fully account for. "How much time?" she asked. 6 months. "And if after 6 months I've decided it isn't working?" He held her gaze. "Then we'll figure out what happens next. But I'm asking for 6 honest months." She laughed, short and humorless. "You're asking me to marry a man I barely know on the strength of a 6-month promise?" "Yes." "That's a terrible offer." "I know," he said. "It's the one I have." Silence stretched between them. Outside, she could hear the morning starting up birds wind, the distant sound of someone else's work on someone else's land. "Why me?" she asked. "There are women in this county who aren't standing in a burning house." Something shifted in his expression. Not discomfort exactly, more like the look of a man choosing his words carefully because he means them. "Because you're not standing in a burning house waiting for someone to save you," he said. "You're standing in it figuring out how to put out the fire yourself. I saw that." He paused. "That's not something you find every day." Lydia looked down at the table. She thought about her father upstairs, about the notice she'd taken off the door, about her mother's hands around that pot last night, steady even when nothing else was. She thought about 6 months and what 6 months bought, and what the alternative cost. "If I agree," she said slowly, "my parents stay in this house. They don't move." "Agreed." "My mother has what she needs for as long as she needs it. That's not a figure that expires." "Agreed. And you'll tell me before we leave this table where it is exactly you're planning to take me, because I'm not riding into the mountains with a stranger on the strength of a polite conversation." He looked at her for a moment, and then something genuinely shifted in his face, the faintest softening quickly contained. "My land is in the valley past the northern ridge," he said. "About 14 miles out. I have workers there, a proper operation." He paused very briefly. "It's more than what people in town believe." She caught the hesitation, caught it and held it and turned it over. "More how?" she asked. "More than I'll explain today," he said, "because some of what I'd say you wouldn't believe without seeing it. And I'd rather show you than have you spend the ride out there deciding I'm a liar." She studied him. He met her eyes and didn't look away. It was, she thought, the most honest dishonesty she had ever encountered. "Fine," she said. 6 months. His expression didn't change much, but something in it settled. Like a man who had been holding a question for a long time, and finally had any answer to work with. "I'll have the debt paperwork handled by end of week," he said. "Good." He stood. He picked up his hat. He looked at her one more time across the table, and she had the strangest, most inconvenient thought that there was something behind those gray eyes that she hadn't even begun to find the edges of. "Miss Hale. Mr. Crow?" He left, and Lydia sat alone at the table and pressed her hands flat against the wood and breathed. She had just agreed to marry a stranger, a poor stranger at that, a man with holes in his boots and no real explanation for where exactly he was planning to take her. What she did not know, what she could not possibly know sitting in that kitchen with the morning light coming through the window, was that Ethan Crow had just told her the truth about one thing and one thing only. It was more than people in town believed. Considerably more. The wedding was quiet. There was no celebration, no gathering of neighbors, no table of food. The minister came on a Thursday, stood in the front room of the Hale farmhouse, and read the words that needed to be read, while Lydia's mother held her father's arm and kept her eyes carefully dry. Lydia wore the best dress she owned. Ethan wore his usual clothes, the worn coat, the dusty hat removed for the occasion. He stood beside her and repeated what he was asked to repeat in a clear, even voice, and when the minister looked between them with the practiced expression of a man who had presided over stranger arrangements than this, he didn't apologize for it. "I do," said Lydia. "I do," said Ethan, and it was done. Her father shook Ethan's hand afterward with both of his, the grip of a man using what strength he had left. Something passed between them that Lydia didn't hear, some quiet word or exchange, and when Ethan stepped back, he looked at her father with a kind of gravity that had nothing performative about it. Her mother held Lydia's face in her hands for a long moment before they left. "You're braver than I was at your age," her mother said. "I'm not brave," Lydia said. "I'm just out of options." Her mother shook her head once gently. "That's exactly what bravery is, sweetheart." Lydia climbed into the wagon. Ethan took up the reins, and they rode north. She watched him for the first half hour of the ride, and he said almost nothing. Not because he was unfriendly. He answered when she spoke. He pointed out a trail marker she'd asked about. But he didn't fill silence the way most people did. He didn't perform ease or warmth, or the particular chattiness of a man trying to win someone over. He just rode, and the horses moved steadily beneath a wide pale sky, and the town fell away behind them. After a while, that silence stopped feeling hostile and started feeling like something else. Like a man who was simply comfortable enough in his own skin not to need noise. She didn't know what to make of that. "How long have you been on your land?" she asked. "About 9 years," he said. "Alone, more or less." "That's a long time to be alone." "It is," he agreed. He didn't elaborate. She watched him a moment. "Were you born in this county?" "No, Kansas originally." A pause. "Moved out here when I was about 19. What made you stay?" He considered that seriously, like a man who didn't offer reflexive answers to real questions. "The land suited me," he said finally. "The distance from things." "The distance from what things?" He glanced at her sideways. It was the first time he'd fully turned toward her since they'd left, and she was caught slightly off guard by the directness of it. "From people who want to know your business before they know your character," he said. That answer settled into her. It was not the answer of a man with nothing to hide, but it was also somehow the answer of a man who was not ashamed of having something to hide. There was a distinction there. She held on to it. "You should know," she said, "that I'm not particularly easy to manage." "I don't need you to be managed," he said. "What do you need me to be?" He thought about that for a moment, really thought about it. The way she was starting to understand was simply how he worked. He didn't reach for the comfortable answer, he reached for the accurate one. "Present," he said finally. "I need you to be present, to look at what's actually in front of you without deciding what you see before you get there." She thought about the notice face down on the kitchen table. about all the ways she had tried to look at her family's situation without actually seeing it. "I can do that," she said quietly. They rode on. The first sign came about 2 hours out of town. She heard them before she saw them, men on horses moving parallel to the road in the trees. Not threatening exactly, but positioned, watchful. "Who are those men?" she asked. "Mine," Ethan said without looking up. "Your men are patrolling the road. They patrol the approach to the property." He said it the same way you'd say the sky is that way, as though it were simply obvious. Lydia looked at the riders in the trees and then back at her husband. "Ethan?" "Yes." "Poor men don't need patrol riders." A silence. "No," he said. "They don't." "Then I'd like an explanation." "You'll have one," he said, "when we get there." "When we get where?" He finally looked at her, and his expression was careful, measured. The face of a man approaching a very specific moment with a very specific intention. "You wanted to know where I was taking you," he said. "You'll know soon." She turned forward in the seat. The trees thickened on both sides of the road. The patrol riders kept pace in the shadows. And something in Lydia Hale's chest, this woman who had come into this marriage with her eyes open and her expectations deliberately lowered, began to do something she had not given it permission to do. It started to wonder, not about what she'd given up, about what exactly she had stumbled into. They passed through a set of gates that she almost didn't notice until they were through them. Stone pillars on either side of the road, the gate itself standing open, 2 men posted nearby who straightened when Ethan's wagon came through and nodded at him with the kind of quiet, specific deference that you could not mistake for mere courtesy. These men worked for him. She understood that. But this was not the relationship of a man who paid occasional wages for occasional labor. This was something more structured, more deliberate. She didn't say anything yet. She was adding things up, and she wasn't finished. The road improved on the other side of the gate. Not dramatically, but noticeably, it had been graded and maintained in a way that the approach hadn't been. The horses moved differently under them, their footing easier, their pace more confident. More workers appeared. A man driving a loaded wagon in the opposite direction lifted a hand to Ethan. A group of 3 men repairing a fence line paused and acknowledged him. An older man on horseback called out something she couldn't hear, and Ethan answered briefly without stopping. These were not a poor man's employees. There were too many of them. The equipment they were using was too well maintained. The organization of it all, the sense of a working, purposeful operation rather than a desperate scramble, was too evident to dismiss. "How many people work for you?" she asked. "About 30, he said. "On this side." "On this side." "There's another side," she asked. "There are several operations," he said. He said it quietly, factually, like a man who has been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and is finally carefully setting it down. Lydia looked at her husband, this man in the worn coat with the holes in his boots. This man the whole town had written off, this man she had married 6 hours ago, because she had no other choice, and she felt something shift under her feet that had nothing to do with the road. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "What is this?" "This," he said, "is my land." The wagon crested a low rise, and Lydia Hale saw it. It did not come into view slowly. It was simply there, suddenly fully formed, as though the landscape had been holding it back on purpose, and then chose to reveal it all at once. She said nothing. She couldn't have said what she felt in that moment, using any words she currently owned. She just looked, and behind her, somewhere back in the direction they'd come from, the life she had understood herself to be living became something else entirely. The man beside her let her look. He didn't explain yet. He didn't apologize. He just drove his horses steadily forward toward the place that no one in town knew existed and waited for her to find the beginning of her next question. Because he already knew she had one. She had, he suspected, about 1,000 of them. And for the first time in 9 years of keeping everything locked away in silence and secrets and deliberate invisibility. Ethan Crow found himself looking forward to answering. She didn't move for a full minute. That was the thing Ethan noticed most. Not the sharp intake of breath, not the way her hands had gone still in her lap, it was the stillness of her. A woman who had walked into every difficult thing in her life, with her chin up and her thoughts running fast, and she was just still. Like the sight of it had reached inside her and turned something off temporarily just to make room. He let her have it. He knew what it looked like from the outside. He had watched it happen before with the handful of men he'd trusted enough to bring to the property. The mind did a kind of reckoning. Everything it had been told about this man, everything it had used to build a picture of who he was, and then the picture simply didn't match, and the mind had to throw out the work and start over. It was disorienting. He understood that. What he hadn't fully prepared for was watching it happen to his wife. "Say something," she said finally. Her voice was controlled. Deliberately controlled, he recognized the effort in it. "What would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to explain," she said, "what I'm looking at." "It's my home." She turned to look at him. Then, and her eyes were doing something complicated. Anger and confusion, and something else he couldn't name. Something that sat underneath both of those like bedrock. "Your home," she repeated. "You live in a shack at the edge of town." "I keep a shack at the edge of town," he said. "There's a difference." "That is not a difference that makes sense." "It will," he said. "Give me 10 minutes inside and I'll explain everything." "You'll explain everything." The words were flat, testing them for truth. "I promised you honesty," he said. "I'm not backing away from that." She looked at him for another long moment. He held her gaze and didn't dress it up with reassurance he hadn't earned yet. He just let her look, and when she was done looking, she turned back toward the estate with an expression he was starting to understand was her thinking face private and precise, and not interested in being interrupted. "Drive," she said. He drove. The workers near the entrance acknowledged him with the same quiet nod as before, and he watched Lydia register each one of them, counting, cataloging, updating whatever internal ledger she was running. She was sharper than he'd been prepared for, and he had prepared for quite a lot. She noticed things, she filed them, and she did not pretend she hadn't noticed. He found that he liked that about her considerably more than he'd expected to. They pulled up, and he helped her down from the wagon. She accepted the hand without comment, which was its own kind of language, and then they were standing in front of the main entrance, and she was looking at it the way a person looked at something. They were trying to find a flaw in, because surely there was a flaw. Surely something about this had a reasonable explanation that didn't require her to rebuild everything she'd believed about the last 24 hours. "How long?" she asked. "How long what?" "How long has this existed?" "The main structure about 6 years," he said. "I've been adding to it since." 6 years. She said it quietly. Something moved across her face. 6 years and no one in town knows. "A few people know," he said. "The right people. And the wrong people don't." She looked at him directly. "That was intentional." "Very," he said. "Why?" He opened the front door and gestured inward. "Come inside," he said, "and I'll tell you the whole of it." She walked past him without hesitation. That too he noted. She didn't hover at the threshold or move tentatively. She walked through the door of an unknown place like a woman who had decided that hesitation cost more than it bought, and the way she held herself when she crossed into the main hall spine. Straight eyes moving, taking stock. It was the posture of a woman who had never in her life been able to afford being caught off guard. He closed the door behind them. She turned a slow circle in the hall, looking at everything with that same precise attention, and then she stopped and faced him. "Talk," she said. He took off his hat and set it on the side table, a gesture she had seen him perform twice now, always at the moment of a real conversation, and he looked at her across the space between them. "I grew up with nothing," he said. "Not poor the way some people mean when they say poor. I mean nothing. My father worked himself to death on land that wasn't his for a man who paid him wages that never covered what he owed the company store. When he died, my mother had less than when they'd started." He paused. I was 17. I watched that happen and I made a decision. What decision? That I would never be visible until I was protected, he said. That every dollar I earned and every piece of land I acquired would be mine, not on paper for someone else to contest, not known to men who'd want to take it mine. Fully, quietly. She was listening. He could see her listening, not just hearing, but actually tracking the shape of it, fitting pieces together. So you built all of this, she said, and then you kept living in a shack. The shack is useful, he said. Men don't come after a poor cowboy. They don't send lawyers. They don't make offers designed to pressure you into selling. They don't look twice. He let that sit for a moment. I've watched men with half what I have lose everything because they couldn't stop being seen with it. I decided a long time ago that being unseen was worth more than being respected. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her work through it, not looking for a hole in the logic, he realized, but looking for the cost of it. The real cost. That must have been lonely, she said finally. The word caught him off guard. He had expected more questions about the land, about the money, about the legal structure of how he'd built it. He had not expected her to go directly for the thing underneath all of that. He didn't answer right away. Yes, he said. It was. Something shifted between them. Not warmth exactly. It was too early for warmth. They were still two people in a room with a great deal of very new information between them. But something. An acknowledgement of something real. You still haven't told me why you brought me into this, she said. The real reason, not the polite version. The polite version was the real version, he said. I want someone here. I want someone who... He stopped, started again. I've built something worth building, and I've been the only person who knew it. After a while, that starts to feel like building in the dark. She looked at him steadily. And you chose a woman whose family was drowning in debt. I chose a woman who was fighting, he said. The debt was circumstance. The fighting was her. Another silence. This one had a different texture. I want to see all of it, she said. Today? Today, she said. I want to walk through it, and I want you to tell me what everything is and how it works, and who those men are and what they do. I want the full picture. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. And they began. He showed her the property the way he did most things, methodically, without performance. He didn't try to impress her with it. He simply told her what was true and let her form her own conclusions. And when she asked questions, he answered them directly. And when she asked follow-up questions, he answered those too. The mill came first. She asked about the operation, the output, who bought from it, what the arrangements were. He answered everything. She listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that she was being given access to information that most people in her life would never have access to, and she did not waste it on superficial reactions. Then the worker quarters. This surprised her more than anything else. He could see it, not the existence of them, but the condition. Clean, maintained, fair. She stopped and looked at the rows of them, and her expression shifted into something careful. You pay them properly, she said. It was not quite a question. I pay them what the work is worth, he said. That's not something most men in your position do. I know what it cost my father to work for a man who didn't, he said simply. She absorbed that without comment, but she absorbed it thoroughly. They moved through 3 more operations. Storage structures, a working kitchen for the crew, a set of stables that held horses considerably finer than anything a poor cowboy ought to possess. And all the while, she walked beside him and asked her questions, and he answered them. And somewhere in that exchange, something that had started as a transaction began to feel like something else. Like two people learning the particular language of each other's minds. Then one of his men came to find him. His name was Cal. He'd been with Ethan for 5 years, reliable and quiet, and the kind of man you trusted in a tight spot without needing to think about it. He came up to Ethan with the specific walk that meant something was wrong, and he didn't want to say it in front of the woman standing there. Ethan looked at him. Say it. Cal glanced at Lydia. You sure she lives here? Ethan said. Say it. Cal adjusted. Ryder came through the north fence line this morning. Left before we could stop him. He was on foot when we found him. Left his horse somewhere before he crossed. We tracked him back toward the Henderson Road. Ethan's expression didn't change outwardly, but something in his posture tightened by a degree. How far in did he get? Close enough to see the main building from the ridge. Lydia was watching both of them and not pretending she wasn't. Who sent him? She asked. Cal blinked at her. Nobody had briefed him on a wife with opinions. We don't know yet, Ethan said. But you have a guess, she said. A pause. I have a guess, he admitted. She waited. It was the particular waiting of a woman who understood that she had just been handed the edge of something much larger than a trespassing incident, and she was not going to let it go without knowing what it connected to. There are men who have been trying to find out the extent of my holdings for the last 2 years, Ethan said. I've managed to keep them looking in the wrong places, but that's gotten harder. He paused. Whoever that rider was, he wasn't here by accident. And now he's gone back to report what he saw. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. How bad is that? It complicates things, he said. Ethan? Her voice was quiet, but very direct. I'm not made of china. How bad is it? He looked at her. And then because she had asked him directly, and he had promised her the truth, he said, the men looking for this property have the resources to make a legal claim if they find the right angle. They've done it before to other landowners in this territory. They use surveyors, they use corrupt officials, they manufacture disputes about original titles. He paused. If they know this exists, they're going to come for it. The hall was quiet. Then we need to be ready before they come, she said. He looked at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. I've just... He stopped. I've had this conversation with myself many times. You're the first person I've had it with out loud. She held his gaze for a moment, and something moved across her face that she didn't fully contain. Not softness. More like recognition, the look of a person who understands suddenly and viscerally that another person has been carrying something entirely alone. Then we'd better start talking faster, she said. That night, she lay awake in the room he had given her own room separate, which she had not expected, and which told her something additional about him, and she listed everything she knew. She did this the way she did everything systematically, without flinching from the parts that were uncomfortable. She knew he was not poor. He was the opposite of poor. He had built an empire in deliberate silence over 9 years, had maintained a false identity in town, with such consistency that nobody had seen through it. That level of discipline required something beyond stubbornness. It required fear. Not cowardice, she already knew enough about him to rule that out, but a deep, lived fear of what happened to men who were visible with what they had. A fear he'd watched come true in his own childhood. She knew there were enemies, real ones with resources and intentions. The rider this morning was not a coincidence. Whoever had sent him had been looking for a while, and now they'd found something. She knew he had brought her here anyway, despite the danger. He had looked at her situation, at her family's desperation, and made an offer, and she had taken it, but he had done it knowing that this was the world she was walking into. He had told her it was more than people believed. He had not told her the rest. That last part sat uncomfortably. She got up. She went downstairs and he was already there. He was at the table with papers spread in front of him. She could see maps, documents, what looked like property records, and he looked up when she came in without apparent surprise, as though he'd half expected her. Couldn't sleep, he said. You should have told me about the danger before we married, she said. She said it without heat, just plainly, standing across from him with her arms crossed and her feet bare on the wooden floor. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. I should have. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid you'd say no. The honesty of it landed harder than an argument would have. She stood with it for a moment. That wasn't your call to make for me, she said. You're right, he said. I know that. He paused. I'm sorry. She looked at him. He meant it. She could see that he meant it in the uncomplicated way of a man who didn't apologize to manage people, but because he'd actually done something he was accountable for. What are those? She gestured at the papers. Property records, he said. Title documentation. I'm trying to identify which angle they're likely to come from. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. He watched her look at the documents. Walk me through it, she said. Lydia. You said you built this in the dark, she said, looking up at him. You said you were tired of nobody knowing what this was. She held his gaze. I'm here. I'm awake. Walk me through it. A long silence. Then Ethan Crowe pushed the papers across the table toward his wife, and for the first time in 9 years, started talking about what he'd built. They sat there for 2 hours. She asked questions he hadn't expected. Precise practical questions about documentation gaps and survey discrepancies, and which of his titles had the cleanest chain of ownership. She understood more about land law than he'd anticipated, and when he asked her about it, she told him with complete matter-of-factness that her father had walked her through the paperwork when the farm started failing because he wanted her to understand exactly what they were losing and why. That answer went somewhere in him. They were still at the table when the first pale change came to the dark outside the window. Neither of them had noticed the night passing. You should sleep, he said. So should you, she said. He looked at her across the papers and the half-burned candle between them, and he thought carefully, without letting it show, that he had not made a wrong decision. That the woman who had sat down at his table in the middle of the night and asked him to walk her through his problems, instead of waiting to see how they landed, that was not a woman who was going to let this place be taken. He didn't say that. Go sleep, he said instead. She stood and gathered her robe and walked toward the stairs, and then she stopped with her back to him. Ethan. Yes. The man who sent that rider, she said. What's his name? A pause. Just a beat. Dennison, he said. Arthur Dennison. She nodded once, the slow nod of someone filing something precisely. All right, she said. And she went upstairs. Ethan sat alone at the table and looked at the papers and the candle and the empty chair across from him, and he felt something he had felt so rarely that it took him a full minute to identify it correctly. He did not feel alone. The days that followed had their own particular rhythm. Ethan was up before dawn, without exception. She learned that on day 2, when she came downstairs early and found the coffee already made and the man already gone. He moved through the property with a precision that was total and unhurried, overseeing everything present, everywhere, making decisions the way some men breathed, constantly automatically without apparent effort. She watched him with the workers. That told her more about him than anything he'd said at the table. He knew their names. All of them. He knew which man had a wife in town and which one was sending money back to his family in Missouri, and which one had been injured last winter and was still favoring his left side. He didn't make a show of knowing. He just knew. And the men felt it, and the way they worked reflected it, not the grudging compliance of men who feared their employer, but the focused effort of men who respected him. She found that complicated. Not unpleasant, just complicated. She had expected walking into this a man who kept people at a managed distance, who used money to maintain control, who ran an operation the way a general ran a campaign. Instead, she was watching a man who had built loyalty the way you built anything durable, slowly, genuinely, through 10,000 small decisions made with actual care. On the 4th day, she asked Cal about it. He looked at her sideways. Ma'am, how long have you worked for him? 5 years near about. Did you know about the property before you came here? Cal shook his head. He told me on the 2nd day. He said if I was going to work for him properly, I needed to know what I was working for. A pause. He asked me to keep it quiet. I have. Why? She asked. You could have told anyone, Why didn't you? Cal considered that. He was a man who thought before he spoke she'd noticed another quality she associated now with some wryness with Ethan Crow's hiring instincts. Because a man who's straight with you, Cal said slowly, is hard to find, and I wasn't going to throw that away for a bit of gossip. She chewed on that for the rest of the afternoon. On the 5th day, something happened that changed the temperature of everything. Ethan came in from the north fence line with his jaw set in the particular way she was learning to read. Controlled on the surface, working hard underneath, and he set a folded paper on the table in front of her. "What is this?" she asked. "A letter," he said. "It was delivered to the shack in town this morning. Someone wrote it out." She opened it. The handwriting was formal. The language was the polished language of a man who had lawyers write his threats for him. It was addressed to Ethan Crow, and it made in beautifully constructed paragraphs a polite suggestion that certain land holdings in the Northern Valley might benefit from being transferred to new management, and that the alternative was a formal review of the original titles, which might raise certain irregularities that could prove costly to resolve. Lydia read it once and then read it again. "He knows," she said. "He knows something," Ethan said. "He doesn't know the full extent of it, but he knows enough." "That rider," she said. 5 days ago." "Yes." She set the letter down on the table. "This is a threat," she said. "A polite one." "There's no such thing as a polite threat," she said. "There's just a threat with better manners." She looked up at him. "What does he want?" "The rail route," Ethan said. "That's the real target. My land sits across the most direct path for the new Northern Railroad line. Dennison has been buying up land along the route for the last year. He needs mine to complete it. And instead of making you a real offer, he'll manufacture a title dispute and buy it for half value from a court decision," Ethan said. "That's how he works. He's done it to 3 other landowners in the last 18 months. Lydia looked at the letter, then at Ethan. "Does he know you're married?" she asked. A pause. "I don't know," Ethan said. "If he does," she said slowly, "he might think that changes the calculation. A wife is either a vulnerability or a complication, depending on how he reads you." Ethan looked at her with an expression that was doing something careful. "That's a precise way of thinking about it." "I'm a precise person," she said simply. She picked up the letter again. "Can I keep this?" "What for?" "I want to read the language again," she said. "The way a threat is written tells you something about the person writing it. I want to know what this tells me about Arthur Dennison." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her in that particular way he had not surprised exactly, but recalibrated, like a man adjusting a measurement he'd made slightly wrong the first time. "Keep it," he said. She took the letter upstairs. She read it 4 more times before she slept, and each time she read it, she felt something sharpen in her that had been dull for a long time. Not anger. Clarity. The specific clarity of a woman who had spent the last several years fighting for things she was losing, and had now for the first time found herself fighting for something that might actually be worth winning. Outside, the horses shifted in the stables. Somewhere on the north fence, Cal made his rounds in the dark, and in the main hall of the estate that no one in town knew existed, the lamp on Ethan Crow's table burned until long past midnight, because the man who had spent 9 years keeping his secrets was finally in a position to share them. He just wasn't certain yet what that was going to cost. But downstairs, the letter was already telling Lydia Hale something that Ethan Crow hadn't fully understood yet. Arthur Dennison wasn't just coming for the land. He was coming for everything. She found the pattern on the 3rd reading. Not the 3rd time that night, the 3rd morning. She had woken up before Ethan again, taken the letter downstairs with her coffee, and read it the way you read something you already know contains a lie, looking not for what it said, but for the shape of what it was hiding. Dennison's lawyer had written it. That was clear enough from the construction. The passive voice used strategically, the qualifications layered inside qualifications, the careful absence of any direct accusation. But lawyers wrote what their clients told them to write, and the priorities in the letter were Dennison's own. He mentioned the railroad exactly once, almost as an aside. He spent considerably more language on the title irregularities, which meant the title was the real weapon. She was still sitting with that when Ethan came in. "You're up early," he said. "I've been up for an hour." She turned the letter to face him across the table. He doesn't actually care about the railroad. Not primarily. He's going to use the title dispute as leverage, force you into a position where settling is cheaper than fighting. He knows you've kept this quiet. He's betting that you'll pay him to go away rather than have it exposed in court. Ethan poured his coffee and sat down slowly. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. "That's been my assessment too," he said. "Then you've already thought about how to counter it." "I've thought about it," he said. "I haven't settled on an answer." "The answer is that you need a lawyer who isn't in Dennison's pocket," she said. "And you need him before Dennison files anything, because once it's in front of a judge, the timeline is his to control." Ethan's hands were wrapped around his cup. He was looking at her with that careful, recalibrated expression she'd come to recognize, the look of a man revising a calculation midway through. "I have someone in mind," he said. "A man in Caldwell. I've used him twice for title work. He's clean." "Send for him today," she said. "I was planning to send Cal this week." "Today," she said again, not unkindly. "Dennison has already moved once. He's not going to slow down because we're thinking about it." A beat. "Today?" Ethan agreed. Cal rode out within the hour. The lawyer's name was Frank Aldridge, and he arrived 2 days later looking like a man who had ridden hard and didn't enjoy it. Road-dusted, slightly irritable, with sharp eyes behind his dust, and a leather case he kept close to his body, the way some men kept a sidearm. He walked into the estate and stopped in the hall and looked at it the way everyone looked at it the first time, the sudden reset, the quiet recalculation. "You've been busy," he said to Ethan. "For a while," Ethan said. Aldridge turned to look at Lydia with an appraising expression that was professional and not unkind. "Mrs. Crowe." "Mr. Aldridge," she said. "Sit down. We have a great deal to cover." He glanced at Ethan, who gave him nothing. Aldridge sat. What followed was 3 hours that Lydia would remember as some of the most clarifying of her life. Aldridge was precise and direct, and he did not soften things, which she appreciated entirely. He went through Ethan's title documentation with the focused intensity of a man looking for exactly the kind of crack that Dennison's people would be looking for, and he found two. Not fatal cracks, but real ones. Survey descriptions on 2 of the smaller parcels that had never been properly recorded with the county office because Ethan had acquired them privately and filed informally. Technically, sound legally vulnerable if the wrong judge looked at the wrong language in the wrong light. "He knows about these," Aldridge said, setting the documents down flat. "How certain are you?" Ethan asked. "I'm certain enough that I wouldn't be surprised if he's already drafted the challenge." Aldridge looked at both of them. "The good news is that these are fixable. The bad news is that fixing them takes time, and time is what Dennison is trying to take from you." He looked at Lydia. "You mentioned in your letter that he referenced a court review. Has anything been filed?" "Not yet, as far as we know," she said. "Then we have a window," Aldridge said. "A narrow one." He paused. "There's something else you should know. I heard something in Caldwell before I rode out. Dennison has been talking to the county assessor's office, asking questions about holdings in the Northern Valley." He looked at Ethan. "He's building a map. He may not know the full extent of what you have, but he's working toward it." Ethan was very still. "Who in the assessor's office?" he asked. "A man named Pruitt," Aldridge said. "He's been with the office 8 years. Not known for corruption, which means Dennison is either paying him very well or has something on him." Lydia was already thinking 2 moves ahead. If Pruitt is feeding Dennison information from the assessor's office, then every filing we make to fix the title gaps goes straight to Dennison the moment we make it. Aldridge looked at her with something that was almost approval. "Correct," So we need to fix the gaps without filing through Pruitt's office. Also correct, he said. Which is not impossible, but it requires going to the district office in Wichita instead of the county. He paused. Which means Dennison doesn't see it coming until it's already done. How long? Ethan asked. 2 weeks if I leave tomorrow morning. Go, Ethan said. Aldridge looked between them once more, the specific look of a lawyer who has just walked into a situation considerably more complicated than he'd expected and is reassessing his fee, and then he nodded once and began putting the documents back into his case. That night after Aldridge had eaten and turned in, Lydia and Ethan sat on the porch in the dark, and neither of them spoke for a long time. It was the first time they had been genuinely still together. No papers on the table, no problems to work through, just two people sitting in the dark with the weight of the last week between them, and the particular quiet of a place that was for the moment not actively on fire. Are you frightened? He asked. She thought about that honestly. No, she said. I think I should be. But no. Why not? Because I spent the last 2 years being frightened of things I couldn't do anything about, she said. Debt and illness and the slow loss of everything. I couldn't push back against any of it. She paused. This I can push back against. That feels different. He was quiet. What about you? She asked. I've been frightened of this for 9 years, he said. Someone finding it. Someone coming for it. He paused. The strange thing is, now that it's happening, I'm less afraid than I expected to be. Maybe because you're not handling it alone this time, she said. The words went out into the dark and sat there. He didn't answer for a moment. Maybe, he said. She got up to go in and then stopped. Ethan? Yes. When this is over, she said quietly, I want you to tell me everything, not just the legal structure, everything. Where you came from, what you built first, how it grew, all of it. She paused. I want to know the whole story. He looked at her in the dark. When this is over, he said, I'll tell you all of it. She went inside. He sat alone on the porch for another hour, and what he felt was not the cold, familiar weight of isolation he had lived with for 9 years. It was something else. Something that felt cautiously and without his full permission, like the beginning of trust. 3 days after Aldridge rode for Wichita, Cal came back from his morning patrol with a look on his face that Lydia had not seen before. She was in the main hall when he came in, and she saw it immediately, that specific suppressed urgency of a man who has information and is calculating how fast to deliver it. Where's Ethan? He said. What happened? There are 2 men in town, Cal said. Came in yesterday on the afternoon stage. They're staying at the hotel. They're not ranchers. They're not traders. They've got the look of surveyor's men. One of them was asking at the general store about property north of the Henderson Road. Lydia went to the bottom of the stairs. Ethan. He appeared at the top in 30 seconds, and she could see from his face that he'd already read something in her voice. Talk, he said, coming down. Cal told him. Ethan listened without interrupting. When Cal finished, Ethan stood very still for a moment, with his jaw working slowly, and his eyes doing the private calculation she'd seen once before, the night she'd found him at the table, with the papers, turning a problem in his hands, looking for its edges. He's moving faster than I expected, Ethan said. He doesn't think you know he's looking, she said. He thinks you're still a poor cowboy who doesn't know what's coming. Ethan looked at her. He's wrong, she said. Yes, Ethan said. He is. He looked at Cal. I need to know where those men go. Not confronted, watched. I want to know every place they visit and every person they speak to. Cal nodded and left. Ethan turned back to Lydia, and she was already looking at the problem. If they're surveyors, they'll try to get close to the property, she said. Not to trespass, just to get a line of sight enough to confirm what the writer saw. If they confirm the size of the operation, Dennison doesn't need the title dispute, she said. He can go straight to a value claim, Force a sale price through the courts. She stopped. Ethan, he can't be allowed to confirm it. I know. Which means those men cannot get north of the Henderson Road before Aldridge gets back from Wichita. He was already nodding. I'll extend the patrol. Push it further south closer to town. Anyone approaching on that road gets turned back. He paused. Quietly. Nothing that looks like obstruction. And if they push, then we'll have a different conversation, he said. His voice was quiet when he said it. Not threatening. Just final. The voice of a man who had built something worth protecting and had reached the place where the building was done and the protecting was what was left. She nodded, and then something else moved across her face. Who in this county does Dennison trust? She asked. He looked at her sideways. Why? Because there's another way to slow this down, she said. If someone were to tell Dennison that the Northern Valley holdings are smaller than the writer reported, that the ridge blocked part of the view, he might hold off the surveyors while he tries to verify it. Ethan was quiet. You want to feed him false information, he said. I want to buy us time, she said. Two different things. He thought about it. There's a man named Hargrove, runs the feed store in town. He has a line to Dennison's people. Not loyalty, just proximity. He talks too much and they listen. Then someone needs to talk to Hargrove, she said. About what exactly? About how the new Mrs. Crow was disappointed, she said carefully. About how the property turned out to be less than she'd been led to believe. About how she's been heard saying that the man she married isn't what she expected. She met his eyes. It's the kind of gossip that spreads without being pushed. And it makes Dennison think twice before committing to a full survey, because if there's domestic trouble in the Crow household, maybe the picture the writer saw was an exaggeration. Ethan looked at her for a long time. That's a considerable risk to your own reputation, he said finally. My reputation is a tool, she said. I'll use it where it's useful. Another long silence. You're sure, he said. I'm sure that 2 weeks is worth more than what people in town think of me, she said. I've never put much stock in the opinions of people who don't know me. He looked at her. Really looked at her in that way he had that made her feel somewhat transparent, like he was seeing past the surface of the words to whatever was underneath them. And she held his gaze and didn't look away because she'd meant what she said and she didn't need to defend it. All right, he said quietly. The plan worked better than either of them had expected, and that was its first warning sign. Within 4 days, the story had moved through town the way all good gossip moved, apparently on its own, gathering detail as it went. By the time it reached Hargrove's feed store, it had acquired specifics that neither Ethan nor Lydia had invented, that she'd been seen looking unhappy on the main road, that Ethan had come into town twice in the past week, looking tighter than usual around the jaw, that the marriage had been a desperation arrangement from the start, and everybody knew it. Cal reported that the 2 surveyors had not moved north of the Henderson Road. They were still at the hotel, and the word from the livery was that they'd extended their stay by only 3 days. Lydia should have been satisfied. She was mostly. But something had shifted. She hadn't expected the gossip to feel quite so real when it came back to her. She heard secondhand through Cal that a woman at the dry goods store had said she'd never thought a poor cowboy would make Lydia Hale happy, and that Lydia had always been too sharp for a man who couldn't keep up with her. There was something that passed itself off as sympathy in those words, but it was the kind of sympathy that ate at a person, the kind that assumed defeat before it had happened. She found herself standing in the yard one afternoon, hands still thinking about what it meant to let people believe something false about your life. She had done it deliberately, with intention, for good reason. She understood all of that. But the thing about performing unhappiness was that it required spending time in the space of it, and spending time in that space left residue. Ethan found her there. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside her the way he did, present quiet, not demanding anything. It's working, she said. I know, he said. I don't love that it's working, she said. I know that too. She turned to look at him. I don't like being the woman in the story who made a bad marriage, even a fake version of it. He held her gaze. You're not that woman, he said. Anyone who actually knows you knows you're not that woman. Most people don't actually know me, she said. Most people don't need to, he said simply. She looked away, then back. My mother is going to hear it eventually. That's the part I hadn't thought through. He was quiet for a moment. I'll send word to her, he said. I'll make sure she understands it's not true before it has a chance to worry her. The offer was so matter-of-fact, he hadn't even paused to think about it. It was just a thing he would do, and it caught her somewhere unguarded. You don't have to. She's your mother, he said. I'll handle it. She stood with that for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, she said. He turned to go back to his work, and she almost let him, and then she said, Ethan. He stopped. The day you came to see my father, she said carefully. You told him you'd looked at me and seen a woman who was fighting, not waiting. She paused. How long had you been watching before you decided to make the offer? A beat. Longer than I'll admit to at present, he said. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. But it's an honest not answer, which is the best I can do right now. He paused at the edge of her vision. Ask me again when we're through the other side of this. She watched him walk away, and she stood there in the yard in the afternoon quiet, and the feeling that moved through her then was not the careful, calibrated trust she'd been tending like a small fire. It was warmer than that, more unruly. The kind of feeling she didn't have a productive plan for, which made her deeply suspicious of it. She put it away. There was too much else to tend to. Aldridge sent a message on the 9th day. Short, written in the compressed language of a careful man who knew letters could be read by the wrong people. Title work in progress. 2 of 3 parcels. Clear 3rd by end of week. Do not file anything locally until I return. Good news mostly. Ethan read it twice and handed it to Lydia without comment. She read it and set it down. He's making progress. He's fast, Ethan said. Good. She looked at the message. What happens after the titles are clean? Dennison loses his angle, Ethan said. He can't manufacture a title dispute if the titles are current and correctly filed at the district level. He'll look for another angle, she said. Yes, the rail route is the real prize, she said. He's not going to walk away because we closed one door. She looked at Ethan. We need to know who the railroad is negotiating with. If we can get to them before Dennison does. I have a contact with the Territorial Railroad Office, Ethan said. I've been in correspondence with them for about a year, preliminary conversations about right-of-way. She stared at him. You've already been talking to them. I had a strong feeling this situation was going to develop, he said. And you didn't think to mention that when we were sitting up until midnight over Dennison's letter. He had the good grace to look briefly caught out. I didn't want to give you too many things at once. She pressed her lips together. Ethan, I need all of it. Not pieces, all of it. I cannot help you think through a problem if I don't know all the pieces. You're right, he said. I'm not used to... He stopped. Having someone to tell, she said. Trusting someone with it, he said. The difference was not small, and they both knew it. She held it for a moment. Get me used to getting the whole picture, she said. Not because I need protecting from it. Because 2 people with the same information make better decisions than 1 person with all of it and 1 person with pieces. He looked at her, and something in him, she could see it faintly, the way you saw weather moving on a distant hillside, shifted. From now on, he said. From now on, she agreed. It was a small thing said plainly between 2 people in a room. But in the way of small plain things, said between 2 people who are still in the early stages of trusting each other, it was not small at all. 2 days later, Cal came in from the South Patrol at a pace that told Lydia before he opened his mouth that something had broken wrong. He found her first. The surveyors moved, he said. Her stomach dropped. North, east first, then cut north through Garver's unused field. They avoided the Henderson Road entirely. He paused. They got to the ridge Mrs. Crow. They got a clear view of the main property. She was already moving toward the stairs. "Ethan?" He appeared in seconds. Cal told him. Ethan's face went still. Not the controlled stillness she'd seen before, something harder than that. The look of a man absorbing news that changes the math of everything he's been working toward. "How long ago?" he said. 2 hours, maybe 3, Cal said. "I found their tracks on the way back. They didn't try to hide them." "They didn't need to," Ethan said quietly. "They already got what they came for." The hall was very quiet. Lydia looked at Ethan and saw in his face what she recognized as the edge of something. Not despair, not panic, but the particular tight-jawed look of a man realizing that the window he'd been working in had just closed. Dennison's men had seen the estate. The full estate. And within days, Dennison would know exactly what he was going after. And Aldridge was still 2 days from returning with the title work. "Cal," she said. "Ma'am, ride to Wichita, tonight. Find Aldridge and tell him we don't have 2 days." Cal looked at Ethan. Ethan nodded. Cal left at a run. Lydia turned back to Ethan, and his expression was doing that thing again, the recalibration, the calculation running hard behind still eyes. She waited. "They know what this is now," he said. "Yes." "Which means Dennison moves this week. Not next month, not when it's convenient this week. He'll file a challenge the moment his men report back." "I know. If Aldridge doesn't get those titles through before, Aldridge will get there," she said. Her voice was steady. Not optimistic. She didn't deal in optimism. It cost too much, but steady. "And while we're waiting for him, we are not sitting still. You said you have a contact with the railroad office." "Yes. Write to him today," she said. "Not a letter. A proposal. Land figures, route specifications. Whatever you have that makes the case that your land is the right choice. Get it in front of him before Dennison does." She paused. "If the railroad has already heard your name before Dennison starts moving, it changes the conversation." Ethan looked at her. She looked back. "Write the letter," she said. "I'll draft it with you if you want." A beat, no longer than a breath. "Get the paper," he said. She got the paper. They sat down together, and in the hard late afternoon, with the threat of everything they'd built pressing in from every direction, they began for the first time to fight back. Not just to protect what was Ethan's, what was theirs. The letter took 2 hours to write. Not because either of them was slow. Ethan knew the land figures and route specifications by memory. And Lydia had a way with formal language that surprised him, clean and precise, without being cold. But they argued twice over the framing, the particular kind of arguing that happens between two people who are both right about different parts of the same thing, and both times they found a third version that was better than either of their first instincts. When they were done, Ethan read it back once. "That's a good letter," he said. "It's a necessary letter," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her sideways. "You're harder on yourself than you need to be." "I'm practical," she said. "It's not the same thing." She folded the letter and handed it to him. "Send it tonight. Not tomorrow." He sent it that night, and then they waited. Waiting was the hardest part. Harder than working harder, than planning harder, than the arguments over language at the kitchen table. Waiting meant the problem was out of your hands and in someone else's. And Lydia had spent enough years waiting on things she couldn't control to have developed a deep and specific hatred of it. She managed it the way she managed most uncomfortable things, by finding something useful to do with her hands while her mind worked. She spent the next day with Cal walking the property boundaries, asking him to explain what he knew about the operational structure, which workers handled, which responsibilities, where the supply arrangements were, what the vulnerabilities were in the daily movement of materials. Cal answered her questions with the careful thoroughness of a man who had decided she was worth answering thoroughly, and by the time they were done, she had a working picture of the whole operation that was considerably clearer than what she'd had before. She was back at the main hall when the rider arrived. Not from Wichita, not Aldridge. A rider she didn't recognize on a horse she didn't know, carrying a sealed envelope addressed in handwriting she'd never seen. She took it from him herself and waited until he'd gone before she broke the seal. It was from the territorial court. Her stomach pulled tight as she read. The language was formal and unhurried, the language of a document that had been prepared carefully by someone who expected it to be contested. A formal notice of title challenge on 3 parcels of land in the Northern Valley, filed by a representative of the Denison Land and Development Company, citing irregular survey documentation and disputed original filing dates. He had filed it. He hadn't waited for his surveyors to report back. He had filed before they even returned, which meant the survey wasn't reconnaissance. It was confirmation of something he'd already decided to do. She was at the bottom of the stairs before she'd fully processed the implication. Ethan. He came out of the study, and she handed him the notice without a word, and watched his face go through several things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then a hard, controlled stillness that she was beginning to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of too much of it, contained with great, deliberate effort. He filed before the survey came back, he said. He was never uncertain about moving, she said. The survey was for Denison to quantify what he already intended to take. She paused. This was planned weeks ago, possibly longer. Ethan set the notice down on the table. Aldridge, he said. Is still 2 days away, she said. Maybe 1 if Cal pushed hard enough. The filing creates a legal hold, he said. On those 3 parcels specifically, which means I can't transfer, sell, or use them as collateral until the challenge is resolved. His jaw tightened. He's freezing the property in pieces if he files on the other parcels before Aldridge gets back. He can't file on the others, she said. Not yet. The others have clean titles in current record. He doesn't have an angle on them. Not that we know of, Ethan said. That landed between them with a particular weight. What aren't you telling me? She said quietly. He looked at her, and she could see him making the decision in real time, the old habit of holding things back running up against the promise he'd made her at this same table, all of it not pieces. There's a parcel on the eastern side, he said slowly. About 40 acres. I acquired it 6 years ago from a man named Teller. He was elderly, no family needed money. We made an arrangement, I paid him fair value, and he transferred the deed. He paused. Teller died 2 years later. His estate was handled by a lawyer in town named Beecham. She kept her eyes on him. Beecham. Who is, Ethan said, Arthur Denison's personal attorney. Silence. Ethan. I know. Beecham handled Teller's estate, which means Beecham has access to Teller's original papers, which means Denison's own lawyer has documentation of the Teller transaction. Yes. And you didn't tell me this before because I didn't think he'd found it yet, Ethan said. Beecham inherited a mess of papers from Teller's estate. I've been hoping the Teller deed was buried deep enough that he'd never prioritized sorting through it. She stared at him. I need you to not keep things back from me because you're hoping they'll stay buried, she said. The things you're hoping will stay buried are exactly the things Denison is digging for. I know, he said. I'm sorry. She took a breath, then another. How bad is the Teller parcel? On its own, manageable. The transaction was legitimate, and I have documentation. But if Denison files on it while the other 3 are already under challenge... He stopped. He doesn't need to win each individual challenge, she said, working it out as she spoke. He just needs to keep enough of your property frozen, long enough for you to be unable to maintain the operation. She looked at him. He's not trying to take your land outright. He's trying to make it too expensive to keep. Ethan was very still. Yes, he said. That's... She caught herself before she said what she was thinking, which was that it was elegant in a horrible way. We need Aldridge here, now. I know. And we need to know whether Beecham has found the Teller papers. How are we going to know that? She thought for a moment. Does Beecham have a clerk? Young man named Peters, works in the office on Main Street. Does Peters know what he works on, the specifics? Clerks know everything, Ethan said. Whether they realize they know it is a different question. Then someone needs to have a casual conversation with Peters, she said. Not about Dennison, not about titles, about Teller, about whether the estate was ever fully settled. That's a risk, Ethan said. If Peters reports the conversation back to Beecham, then Beecham knows we're worried about it, she said, which he'll find out anyway the moment they file. At least this way, we know what they have before they use it. She held his gaze. I'll go. Lydia. I'm a woman who married a poor cowboy and is reportedly unhappy about it, she said. Nobody in that town is looking at me as a threat. I can walk into a conversation with a law clerk and ask about a dead old man's estate, and it looks like nothing at all. He held her gaze for a long time. You'd be alone in town, he said. I've been alone in town my whole life, she said. I know how to manage it. Another long beat. Take the smaller wagon, he said, and take Rosa. Rosa was the cook, a woman of about 50, who had been with the property for 3 years and had the specific quality of looking entirely unremarkable while missing nothing. Lydia had noticed that within the first week. Good idea, Lydia said. She left at first light. Bob. Peters was young and eager and slightly bored, which was exactly the combination Lydia needed. She found him at the clerk's desk in Beecham's outer office, and she told him a story she'd constructed the night before, that her father had done some business with old Teller years back, land bordering Teller's original claim, and she was trying to close out some paperwork her father had never finished before his illness. Was Teller's estate fully settled? Were all the deed transfers accounted for? Peters checked his ledger with the helpfulness of a young man not yet experienced enough to know when a question shouldn't be answered. He ran his finger down a column, and then his expression changed by just a fraction. Just a small tightening at the corner of his eyes, the look of someone who has found something that surprised him. Most of the estate was settled in 71, he said. There's one property transfer that was flagged for review last month. I'm not sure what the status of that one is. Flagged by whom? She asked, keeping her voice light. He hesitated. I'm not sure I should say. Of course, she said pleasantly. I understand completely. She bought a spool of thread at the dry goods store and drove back in the smaller wagon with Rosa sitting beside her, and she didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes of the ride because she needed to think. Beecham had flagged the Teller transfer. Last month, before the surveyors, before the letter, before any of the visible movement. Which meant Dennison had been building the Teller angle for weeks. He had multiple challenges ready. He was intending to file them in waves, each one landing before the previous one was resolved, keeping the legal situation perpetually tangled. She was still working through it when Rosa said without looking up from her knitting, "There were 2 men outside Beecham's office when we went in." Lydia glanced at her. "I didn't see them." "One on each side of the street," Rosa said. "Watching the door. Not together, they were pretending not to be together. But they watched us go in." A beat. "Did they follow us out?" Lydia asked. "The one on the left started moving when we did," Rosa said, still knitting. "He stopped after about a block, made sure we were heading out of town before he stopped." Lydia kept her eyes on the road. Dennison has people watching Beecham's office. "Or watching anyone who asks questions about the office," Rosa said. "Which means they now know someone came to ask about Teller's estate." "Yes, ma'am," Rosa said. Lydia drove in silence for a moment. "Rosa," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for noticing." "I notice things," Rosa said simply, and went back to her knitting. Aldridge arrived before she did. She came through the estate gate to find his horse already at the post, and Ethan and Aldridge deep in papers at the main table, and the look on Aldridge's face when she walked in was the look of a man managing a situation that had changed dimensions since he'd left. "He filed on 3 parcels, Ethan said. "I know," she said. "And he has the Teller documents. I'd put money on it." She sat down and told them what Peters had said. Aldridge was quiet for a moment, then said, "The 3 challenged parcels, I've got 2 of them clean. District filing properly registered completed yesterday morning. The 3rd one is done on paper, but I couldn't get the registrar to stamp it before I left." He paused. I needed one more day, which Dennison didn't give us. Ethan said. No, Aldridge said. But here's what matters. 2 of the 3 are airtight. He can challenge them all he wants, but if he goes to a judge with those 2, the challenge gets dismissed. He looked at the papers. The 3rd one is vulnerable until I can get the stamp. That one concerns me. He paused again. The teller parcel concerns me more. What can he do with the teller documents? Lydia asked. If Beecham found an irregularity, even a technical one, he can file a challenge claiming the original transfer wasn't properly witnessed or recorded. Teller's dead. Ethan would have to prove the transfer's validity against a dead man's estate, which is manageable if we have the original documentation, Lydia said. Do you? Aldridge looked at Ethan. I have the deed, Ethan said, and a letter from Teller written in his own hand dated the day of the transfer describing the arrangement. Aldridge's expression shifted. That letter is worth more than the deed right now. I know where it is, Ethan said. He stood up. He was back in 4 minutes with a box from the study, a plain wooden box locked, which he opened with a key from his coat. Inside were papers organized with the kind of careful precision of a man who had spent years treating documentation like a weapon. He found the letter, set it on the table. Aldridge read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at Ethan and said, If this is authentic, and I believe it is, Dennison can't win the Teller challenge. Not in a fair court. Are we in a fair court? Lydia asked. The question landed in the room with considerable weight. Aldridge and Ethan both looked at her. That, Aldridge said slowly, is the right question. The answer came the following morning. A second notice arrived. Different seal this time, not the territorial court, but the county court, a court that fell under the jurisdiction of a judge named Harlan Cole. Ethan read it and went completely still. Lydia watched him. What? She said. He set the notice down and looked at the table for a moment. Harlan Cole, he said, is Arthur Dennison's brother-in-law. The room went quiet, in a particular way, the quiet of an understanding that shifts the floor beneath your feet. He moved it to Cole's court, Lydia said. The county filing is technically valid, Ethan said. The Teller parcel falls within county jurisdiction. Dennison's lawyers know exactly what they're doing. Aldridge said nothing. He didn't need to. His face said it. Can we challenge the jurisdiction? Lydia asked. Yes, Aldridge said. And we'll lose the challenge. Cole will rule it's properly filed, and we'll have spent 2 weeks on the motion. He paused. What we can do is go above him. District Court has original jurisdiction on land matters over a certain acreage. If the combined parcels in challenge exceed that threshold, they do, Ethan said. Then we file to consolidate, Aldridge said. Pull everything out of Cole's court and up to the district level. It's a harder fight, but it's a fair one. He looked at Ethan. I have to be honest with you. This is going to take time and money. I have both, Ethan said. And it's going to be visible, Aldridge said. A district court filing means public record. It means the size of your holdings becomes part of the court documents. The secret is already out, Ethan said quietly. Dennison's surveyors saw this place. The secret ended 3 days ago. He paused. So we stop protecting the secret and start protecting the land. Lydia looked at him. Something had shifted in him. She could see it, the letting go of a thing he'd held for 9 years. It didn't look like defeat. It looked strangely like relief, like a man who had spent nearly a decade maintaining a fiction and had finally reached the place where the fiction cost more than the truth. File the consolidation, he said to Aldridge. I'll need a few days to prepare it properly. Then start today. Aldridge got to work. That evening, someone fired the south fence line. Not a large fire, controlled, deliberate, the kind of fire that was meant to send a message rather than cause destruction. 3 fence posts and a stretch of wire extinguished within an hour by the patrol. But it was inside the property line. Not on the approach road, not on the boundary. Inside. Someone had gotten through. Cal came in with a look Lydia had not seen on his face before. Not fear. Cal didn't frighten easily. Something colder than fear. Whoever said it knew the patrol rotation, he said. Ethan heard that and said nothing for 10 full seconds. They knew the rotation, he repeated. We turned the south corner on the hour, Cal said. The fire was set in the 15-minute window between passes. That's not a guess. That's someone who knew. The hall was very quiet. Lydia looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Cal. Who knows the rotation? He asked. The regular patrolmen, Cal said. You, me, Rosa hears us talk about it. He paused. And Hayes. Hayes was a worker who had joined them 8 months ago. Capable Quiet had come with a reference from a rancher 2 counties over. Ethan had trusted the reference. Where is Hayes now? Ethan asked. That's the thing, Cal said. He didn't come in for supper. I sent a man to his quarters. Empty. Horses gone. The silence that followed was of a specific kind, the silence of betrayal that has just been confirmed. Lydia felt it land in the room and watched Ethan absorb it. He didn't rage. He didn't curse. He stood very still, and his jaw worked once, and then he said, How long has Hayes been feeding them? I don't know, Cal said. Could be recent. Could be longer. It's longer, Lydia said. Both men looked at her. The surveyors knew to avoid the Henderson Road, she said. They went east first, then cut north through Garver's Field. That's not a guess either. Someone told them the patrol ran heavy on the Henderson approach. She looked at Ethan. Hayes. The word sat in the room like a stone. Ethan looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back down. What did he see? What does he know me? Everything, Cal said. He's worked the property for 8 months. Then Dennison knows everything, Lydia said. The full operation, the rail route access, the exact acreage. She paused. And he knows Aldridge is here. Ethan's eyes went to the study where Aldridge was working. He knows about the consolidation filing, Lydia said quietly. Ethan moved to the study doorway. Aldridge. Aldridge looked up. How quickly can you finish the consolidation draft? Aldridge read his face. Tonight if I don't sleep. Don't sleep, Ethan said. The night was long and nobody rested easy. Lydia sat with Ethan at the table, and they went through everything Hayes could have passed to Dennison, cataloging the damage with the cold efficiency of a field surgeon, assessing a wound, what was known, what could be used, what could still be controlled. He has the operational picture, Ethan said. He knows the size and structure of everything we have. He can tell Dennison's lawyers exactly what to argue the holdings are worth. But he doesn't have the documents, Lydia said. And documents are what matter in a court. Dennison has Beecham. Beecham has Teller's papers. And we have Teller's letter, she said. And Aldridge. And 2 clean titles filed at district level. She looked at him steadily. We're not out of this. He also has Cole, Ethan said. Cole doesn't matter if we get the consolidation through, she said. If. When, she said. He looked at her. In the lamplight in the middle of the night, with all of this pressing in, he looked at her the way he had looked at her across the kitchen table on that first morning, as though he was recalibrating something fundamental. You're not afraid, he said. I'm terrified, she said honestly. But being terrified and being willing to fight are not mutually exclusive. Something moved across his face that she didn't try to analyze. I want to tell you something, he said. All right. The day I came to see your father. He paused. I'd been watching you for 3 months. Not in any way you'd have noticed. But I saw you managing the farm accounts at the general store twice. I saw you talking to the bank man after he came out to the property. I saw you take the debt notice off your front door so your mother wouldn't see it first. He paused again. I watched a woman deal with the worst year of her life and never once look like she expected someone else to fix it for her. He met her eyes. I didn't marry you because of your situation. I married you because of who you were in the middle of it." The room was very quiet. Lydia sat with those words, sat with the weight of them and what they meant and what she felt about them. She had spent so much of this marriage treating it like a transaction to be managed, an arrangement to be honored with integrity, but without illusion. And here was this man in the middle of the worst week either of them had faced, telling her something true in the simplest possible language. "You should have told me that earlier," she said. "I know," he said. "Much earlier," she said. "I know that too." She looked at the table for a moment, then at him. "When this is over," she said the same words they'd used on the porch that night, "we're going to have a very different kind of conversation." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. And this time, the words meant something else entirely. Aldridge finished the consolidation filing before dawn. He came out of the study with dark circles under his eyes and ink on his hands and set the document on the table with the careful reverence of a man handing over something that had cost him considerably. "It's solid," he said. "Every parcel, every title, every piece of supporting documentation. I've argued for district jurisdiction on the combined acreage. No judge in that court can reasonably deny it." He looked at Ethan. "I need to be in Wichita by Thursday to file it before Dennison can move on the third parcel." "Can you make Thursday?" "If I leave by 6 this morning," Aldridge said. "Yes." Ethan looked at the document. At the 9 years of work and secrecy and silence that it represented, laid out now in plain legal language that would become public record the moment it was filed. He picked it up. He handed it to Lydia. She looked at him. "Read it," he said. "Tell me if anything's wrong." She read it carefully, every page. While Aldridge ate the breakfast Rosa had silently appeared to cook, and Ethan stood at the window with his coffee and the morning coming up gray over the hills. She read it once. Then she went back and read 3 specific sections again. "Page 7, she said. "The parcel description on the eastern holding uses the survey language from the original 1869 filing. That's the language Dennison's people will challenge. Aldridge needs to cross-reference the 1871 resurvey, or the description is technically incomplete." Aldridge stopped eating. He took the document and looked at page 7. A pause. "She's right," he said. He went back to the study. It took 45 minutes to correct. When he came out with the revised pages, Ethan looked at Lydia with an expression she had no precedent for. It was too layered, too complicated, too much of everything at once to be reduced to a single name. "Good catch," he said quietly. "It's what I'm here for," she said. Aldridge rode out at 7:15 with the document secured inside his coat. Ethan and Lydia stood in the yard and watched him go. And somewhere between watching Aldridge disappear down the road and turning back toward the house, Ethan Crow reached out and took his wife's hand. Not dramatically, not with words, just reached out and took her hand the way a man reached for the thing he'd been trying not to need for longer than was reasonable. She let him. Neither of them said anything. The morning was cold, and the threat was still out there. Dennison Cole, the third parcel unfiled, Hayes somewhere carrying everything he knew to the wrong people. None of it was resolved. None of it was safe. But standing in the yard with their hands linked in the early cold, both of them knowing exactly what they were up against, and neither of them flinching from it, there was something between them that had not been there when he'd driven her out of town in a worn coat 3 weeks ago. Something that had been built quietly and under pressure the way the best things were built. The kind of thing that didn't break easily, and they were going to need it. Because Arthur Dennison wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Aldridge had been gone 4 days when Dennison made his next move. It didn't come as a letter this time. It didn't come through a lawyer or a court notice or a politely worded threat. It came at 2 in the morning, and it came fast, and Lydia heard it before she fully understood what she was hearing. A sharp crack, then a second, then the particular roar of something catching that was not supposed to catch. She was out of bed before she was fully awake. Ethan was already in the hallway. "The mill," he said. They heard Cal shouting below. The mill was burning. Not the way the fence line had burned controlled deliberate a message. This was an intention. This was someone who had decided that messages weren't working and had moved on to consequences. The fire had caught in the dry storage on the east side, fed by months of timber and sawdust, and it was moving with the specific hungriness of a fire that had been helped along. The workers were already out when Ethan and Lydia reached the yard. 24 men moving with the controlled urgency of people who had drilled for exactly this, forming a line working the water from the pump. Cal directing from the front with the calm voice of a man who understood that panic cost more than it bought. Ethan went to the front line without being asked. Lydia turned and found Rosa already beside her. "How many men do we have on the fence line?" Lydia said. "Cal pulled 3 in to help with the fire," Rosa said. "Get them back on the line," Lydia said. "Now, the fire is the distraction." Rosa moved. Lydia was already thinking the fire was started from inside the property, which meant someone had gotten through the fence while the patrol was managing whatever had drawn them to the south end. A coordinated entry. The fence and the fire together meant 2 groups at minimum, one to breach, one to set. She went to find Cal. "The breach," she said, reaching him at the edge of the fire line. "Where was it?" Cal pointed southeast without turning from the water bucket in his hands. "We found a cut wire about 20 minutes before the fire started. Thought it was the same trespassers as last time." "It wasn't," she said. "They used the cut wire to pull you south, then set the fire while you were repositioning." She grabbed his arm. "Cal, there could still be men inside the fence line." He went still. Then he handed the bucket to the next man in line and turned around. "Santos," he called. "Martinez, with me." The 3 of them moved into the dark beyond the fire's light. Lydia stood in the yard with the fire roaring ahead of her and the dark pressing in from behind, and she felt for the first time since this had all begun the particular cold clarity of a situation that had gone past paperwork and property records and entered something older and more dangerous than law. Dennison was done being patient. They found 2 men sheltering near the equipment barn waiting, not armed for a fight, armed for intimidation. The kind of men you hired to stand somewhere and be looked at. Cal and his 2 workers were considerably more motivated than hired presence, and the encounter was brief and one-sided, and within 15 minutes, both men were secured in the barn with their hands tied and Cal standing outside with a rifle and an expression that required no interpretation. Ethan came back from the fire line at dawn, covered in soot, his voice rough from the smoke. The mill was damaged. Not destroyed, the east storage was gone, and a section of the main structure would need rebuilding, but the machinery itself had survived. 3 hours of hard work by every man on the property had saved it. He stood in the yard and looked at what was left of the east wall, and Lydia watched him absorb it, the damage, the cost, the meaning of it. "It can be rebuilt," she said. "I know," he said. "He's escalating because the legal angle is slipping," she said. "Aldridge is in Wichita. The consolidation is either filed or close to filed. Dennison can feel it." She paused. "This is what a man does when he's losing the fight he planned for and trying to start a different one." Ethan turned to look at her. His face was tired in a way she hadn't seen before, not defeated, but carrying the specific weight of a man who has been managing a crisis for weeks on too little sleep and too much worry. "What do we do with the 2 men in the barn?" he said. "We hold them until we have a marshal to hand them to," she said. "And we document everything. The cut wire, the fire point of origin, the men themselves. We build the record." She held his eyes. "Because when this goes back to court, and it will, we need to show that Dennison didn't just manufacture title disputes. He sent men onto your property to destroy it. That changes the nature of the case." He looked at her steadily. "You're building a countersuit," he said. "I'm building leverage," she said. Something moved in his face past the exhaustion, past the weight of the night. Something that looked almost like wonder, which was an expression she had not expected to see on a man like Ethan Crow. "I'll get paper," he said. They documented everything before the morning was an hour old. The message from Aldridge arrived the next afternoon, and it arrived as a telegram, the fastest thing available, 3 words followed by 4 more: consolidation filed, Thursday. District Court accepted. Come to Wichita. Lydia read it out loud. Then she read it again to herself quietly and felt something release in her chest that had been wound tight for 2 weeks. He did it, Ethan said. He did it. She agreed. Cole's challenges just became irrelevant. Every single one of them, she said. The district court supersedes county jurisdiction. Cole can't touch anything that's in the consolidation. She set the telegram down carefully. He still has the teller parcel challenge pending at county level. But the teller letter is our evidence, she said. Which is why we need to be in Wichita. She looked at him. Both of us. I'm not leaving the property right now. Cal can manage the property, she said. Aldridge needs us in front of that district judge to present the teller letter in person. A letter submitted through a lawyer carries weight. A letter presented by the man whose name is on it with his wife, corroborating the account of the transaction, carries considerably more. She paused. Dennison will have lawyers in that courtroom. We need to be more than lawyers. He thought about it for exactly the amount of time she'd expected him to think about it. We leave tomorrow morning, he said. Tonight, she said. He almost argued. Then he didn't. Tonight, he said. They rode through the night and reached Wichita by midday, and Aldridge met them at the district courthouse with the filed consolidation in hand, and a look that was equal parts exhaustion and satisfaction. The judge assigned to the case is Everett Marsh, Aldridge said without preamble. He's been on the district bench for 11 years. He's known for 3 things: thoroughness, impatience with manufactured disputes, and a particular dislike for wealthy men who use the courts as a business tool. He looked at both of them. That last one is our best asset. When does he hear it? Ethan asked. 2 days, Aldridge said. Dennison's lawyers are already here. They filed a response to the consolidation this morning, arguing that the county matters should be handled separately. He paused. Marsh denied the motion by noon. Lydia felt something that was close to satisfaction. He saw through it. He's seen it before, Aldridge said. He told Dennison's lead attorney, and I'm told he used these words directly, that he did not appreciate his court being used as a delay mechanism in what appeared to be a predatory land dispute. The 3 of them stood in the hallway of the courthouse. 2 days, Ethan said. 2 days, Aldridge confirmed. I need everything you have on teller tonight. Every document, the letter, the deed, the payment record if you have it. We're building the presentation from the ground up. We have all of it, Lydia said. We brought everything. Aldridge looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Ethan. You made a good decision, he said in the tone of a man who was specifically not being sentimental about something sentimental. I know, Ethan said. Dennison arrived in Wichita the following morning. Lydia saw him for the first time across the lobby of the hotel where the Crow party was staying, and he was not what she had constructed in her mind. She had built a villain from the evidence, from the polished letter, from the hired men, and the cut fence wire, and the burning mill. She had expected someone who looked the part. What she saw was a man of about 60, well-dressed, with the particular ease of someone who had spent decades getting what he wanted through a combination of money and positioning. Not violent in the way of his hired men. Patient in the way of a man who understood that patience properly applied was more dangerous than violence. He saw her looking. He crossed the lobby. Ethan was not with her. He was upstairs with Aldridge going through the documents. Lydia was alone, and she knew it, and she didn't move. Mrs. Crow, Dennison said. He had a pleasant voice. That was the most unsettling thing about him. Mr. Dennison, she said. I wonder if I might speak plainly with you, he said. That would be unusual for you, she said, based on your correspondence. Something moved through his eyes, not anger, more like recalibration. He was reassessing her the way she'd reassessed him. Your husband has built something impressive, he said. I mean that genuinely. The problem is that what he's built sits across the path of something larger. The railroad isn't a personal ambition. It's progress. Entire communities depend on that route. Communities, she said. or your investment portfolio?" He smiled, and it was a real smile. She could see that, which made it more unsettling than a fake one. "Both," he said. "I don't pretend otherwise. What I'm offering your husband is a fair price and a clean exit. What he'll get from fighting me is years of legal cost and a settlement that ends up in the same place." "The same place," she said. "Meaning you win." "Meaning this gets resolved," he said. "One way costs less." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Dennison, your men burned our mill 3 nights ago. 2 of them are currently in Cal Reeves' custody on our property. Your surveyor trespassed through a private field to spy on our home. Your lawyer has been manufacturing title challenges from documents he obtained through an estate he was never authorized to use as intelligence." She paused. "You are not offering my husband a fair price. You are offering him the option to stop being robbed." She met his eyes. "We'll see you in court." She walked away. Her hands were perfectly steady. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Aldridge argued the consolidation with the methodical precision of a man who knew exactly how much work he'd put into every page. Dennison's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Collier, pushed back hard on the teller parcel, arguing the original deed transfer lacked sufficient witness documentation. Then Ethan took the stand. He was not a man who performed. Lydia had known that from the beginning. He stood in front of Judge Marsh and he answered every question in the same quiet, direct voice he used for everything, and he presented the teller letter and the deed and the payment record. And he told the story of the transaction plainly: an old man, a fair price, a handshake confirmed in writing. Collier cross-examined for 40 minutes. Ethan didn't waver, not once. Then Lydia was called. She had not expected to be called. Aldridge had not told her. She understood as she stood up that this was a decision he had made without telling her, which she would address with him later. But she also understood sitting down in that chair with Judge Marsh, watching her with the attentive patience of a man who had seen a great many things in this court, that Aldridge had been right to do it. She told the court what she knew. Not as Ethan's wife defending him, she was careful about that, but as a woman who had examined the documentation herself, who could speak to the internal consistency of the records, who could confirm that the operational history of the Crow Holdings was coherent and complete in a way that fraudulent acquisition simply wasn't. Collier objected 3 times. Marsh overruled him 3 times. At the end, Marsh looked at the assembled documentation for a long moment. Then he looked at Collier. "Counselor," he said, "I have sat on this bench for 11 years, and I have never once seen a predatory land grab improve with proximity. This court finds the Crow consolidated title valid and complete. The county-level challenges are dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. The teller transfer stands." He set down his glasses. "I am further noting for the record that the manner in which this challenge was assembled, including the use of estate documents obtained through a position of fiduciary trust, warrants a separate review. I will be contacting the territorial bar." He looked at Dennison's table. "This matter is closed." Collier started to speak. "I said closed, counselor." The room went quiet. Lydia sat in her chair and breathed. Dennison left Wichita the following morning without speaking to anyone. Lydia heard about it from the hotel clerk, a small piece of information delivered without significance, but it carried the specific weight of an ending. A man who had arrived with lawyers and intentions and left with neither. Aldridge found them at breakfast. "There's something else," he said, sitting down with the look of a man carrying news he hadn't been sure would come. "Good something or bad something?" Ethan said. "Your letter to the railroad office," Aldridge said. "The Territorial Rail Commissioner received it 3 days ago. He sent a reply to your property yesterday. I intercepted the message here." He put an envelope on the table. "They want a meeting." Ethan looked at the envelope. He looked at Lydia. She pushed it toward him. "Open it." He did. He read it. Then he handed it to her, and his face was doing several things at once. Controlled, careful, but underneath the control, something that was unmistakably simply relief. The letter was from Commissioner Hayes, a different. Hayes, no relation, an irony she did not mention. and it stated that the railroad was currently reviewing 2 proposed routes for the northern extension, and that the Crow land offered the most direct passage with the fewest acquisition complications. They requested a formal survey meeting within the month. "They were already looking at your land," she said. "Before Dennison filed anything," Ethan said. "He wasn't taking the route from me. He was trying to get to it before the railroad contacted me directly." She understood that immediately. "He panicked," she said. "When the railroad started their review, he realized he'd run out of time to acquire your land cheaply. That's what accelerated everything: the surveyors, the title challenges, the mill." She set the letter down. "He wasn't powerful and patient. He was running." Ethan looked at the letter for a moment. "We should go home," he said. "Yes," she said. "We should." They rode back in 2 days, and the property was standing, and the fence was repaired, and the east wall of the mill had new timber framing already started because Cal had not waited to be told. Lydia walked through the yard and felt something she was not entirely prepared for. Not triumph. Triumph was too loud for what this was. Something quieter. The feeling of a person who has been braced for impact for so long that when it doesn't come, the absence of tension is its own kind of strange. She stopped in the middle of the yard. Ethan stopped beside her. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." The workers were moving around them, the ordinary work of the morning, the sounds of a place that had been threatened and had not broken. She stood in the middle of it and felt it around her, and it felt for the first time like somewhere she lived rather than somewhere she'd landed. "I want to write to my mother today," she said. "I'll have someone write out," he said. "I want to invite her here," she said. "Properly. To see it. To understand where I am." She paused. "I want her to know that I'm not managing. I'm here. This is where I am." He looked at her. "I'll write out myself," he said. She turned to look at him. "You don't have to." "I'd like to," he said simply. "She should hear it from both of us." Lydia held his gaze for a moment. Then she did something she hadn't planned to do and didn't calculate. She stepped forward and put both her arms around him, and she held on for a moment, not dramatically, not as performance, just the plain physical fact of a person holding on to another person because the ground had been unsteady for a long time, and this was solid. He held her back. No words. They didn't need them. 3 weeks later, the railroad commissioner arrived with 2 surveyors who were considerably more welcome than the last pair, and they spent 2 days walking the route with Ethan and Lydia together, and at the end the commissioner sat at the kitchen table and shook Ethan's hand, and then Lydia's, and said he'd have a formal proposal by the end of the month. A month after that, the first families started asking about land near the Northern Valley Road, not to challenge or to acquire, just to settle. The word had gotten out that there was a fair operation in the valley, that the man who ran it kept his word, that the woman beside him was sharp enough to keep the books honest. People came the way people came to anything stable quietly at first. Then, more of them drawn to the particular gravity of a place that had been built to last. The town didn't have the name yet. Someone suggested Crow Valley, and Ethan said he'd think about it, which Lydia understood to mean he was embarrassed by it, which she found unexpectedly endearing. She waited until they were alone that evening. "Ethan," she said. He looked up from the papers. "I need to tell you something," she said. Something in her voice made him put the papers down. She told him. The silence that followed was not like any silence she'd experienced with him before. She had learned his silences by now, the thinking silence, the working silence, the comfortable silence of 2 people who had stopped needing to fill space. This was different. This was a man absorbing something that had rearranged the entire landscape. He stood up from the table. He crossed the room. He took her face in both hands carefully, the way you held something you understood the value of, and he looked at her for a long moment. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm perfectly all right," she said. "Are you?" "I don't know yet," he said, and it was the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. which was considerable given the competition. She laughed. Not the short, controlled laugh she'd used in the early weeks of this marriage. A real one. He smiled, the full version, the one she'd only seen a handful of times, the one that changed his whole face. "We're not just building a ranch anymore," he said. "No," she said. "We're not." Their daughter was born in the spring. The labor was long, and Rosa refused to leave the room, and Ethan sat outside the door for 6 hours without moving from the chair, which Cal reported to Lydia afterward with the quiet amusement of a man who had known Ethan Crow for 5 years and had never once seen him unable to manage his composure until that night. When Lydia told him the name she'd chosen, he was quiet for a moment. "Hope," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at the child in his arms, this small, complete person who had come from the wreckage of the worst year of Lydia's life and the loneliest 9 years of his, from a desperate offer and a face-down notice and a kitchen table and a long night of paperwork and a fire and a courtroom and a railroad commissioner's handshake. "Hope," he said again. He said it the way a man said something he had not expected to be given, with the particular gratitude of someone who had stopped hoping for it before it arrived. The town eventually took the name Hale Creek, which was Ethan's suggestion offered one morning without explanation, and which Lydia accepted without asking for one because she understood it perfectly, and it made her have to look away for a moment so he wouldn't see her face. Her father did not live to see the railroad come through. He died in the fall quietly in the farmhouse, with her mother beside him and Lydia holding his hand. But he died knowing his daughter was safe. He died knowing the land was protected. He died knowing that the man he had shaken hands with in his last strength had kept every single word. Her mother came to live in the valley the following spring. She had her own rooms in the estate, and she spent her mornings sitting with Hope in the yard, and occasionally Lydia would look up from whatever she was working on to see the two of them, the old woman and the small girl sitting in the morning light, in a place that had been built from silence and desperation and a pair of boots with holes in the soles, and she would think this is what it cost, every frightening step of it. The notice face down on the table, the stranger at the door, the mountains and the secrets and the fire and the long nights of paperwork and the courtroom in Wichita and the long cold ride back. This is what it cost, and it was worth every single penny of the price. Named. Years later, when people in Hale Creek told the story, and they did tell it, the way people told stories about places they understood themselves to belong to, they got certain parts of it wrong. They said Lydia had known from the beginning. They said Ethan had planned it perfectly. They said the whole thing had been romantic from the first moment. It hadn't been romantic, it had been hard. It been in. But sometimes Lydia would hear a version of the story, and she would not correct it, because the thing that mattered in it was true even if the details weren't. A woman with no good choices. A man who had kept his whole self hidden so long he'd almost forgotten how to let someone in. The wreckage of a hard year. And the choice, the real choice, the one that happened. Not at the kitchen table on the day she said yes, but in 100 small moments after in the middle of the night over paperwork, and in a courtroom, and standing in a burning yard, and holding on simply because letting go cost more than she was willing to pay. That part was true. Ethan Crow had started as a stranger in a worn coat who offered her a way out of drowning. He became the person she built everything with. Not because the offer had been good, it hadn't. Not because she hadn't had a choice, she almost hadn't. But because they had both, over the course of one hard and honest year, chosen each other in every way that actually counted. A life forced by circumstance, made real by choice. And that was the only story worth telling.